I think that if 2020 had a slogan, it would be when it rains, it pours. This has been such a weird year of just things, just one after another. I remember the year starting off and just, start of weird things happening, and then it just got worse and worse and worse as it went down the road. And so I just kind of see 2020 as being that when it rains, it pours. It just keeps on coming. It kind of has felt like, for a number of people this year, has been like if you went into work and you drove to work and you go inside and you find out you've been fired. You come back out to your car, you see someone has slashed all of your tires, you call a tow truck, you go to the mechanics, they tell you, yeah, we can take care of your tires, but the insurance isn't going to cover it. By the way, your head gasket is also blown, rats ate all of your wires, and then the mechanic just for no reason punches you right in the face. In a way, that's kind of been 2020 for us. It's like one thing after another. Right when you think it can't get worse, just boom, it does. And in fact, it's been amazing to me, not just the things that we know about, but other things that didn't even make that great of an impact on this year. Like the murder hornets, those appeared for like a week, and then they're just gone. I'm sorry, I cannot stop until I eradicate every bug in my house because it is that much. And yet we have murder hornets in the U.S., or at least we did. I don't even know. It's like no one even asked the question, are they still here? And then the government also at one point earlier this year released documents showing evidence of UFOs. You would think we would have heard about that, but it was kind of a blank somewhere, coronavirus, and then there might be UFOs. We're not really sure. So, what? How is that not front-page news? I remember during the 2016 election when, and I'm not getting political here, but when a number of people really did not like either candidate, and so they jokingly said on social media that I'm going to vote for sweet meteor of death. Have you noticed no one's saying that this year? And I think it's because we're a little bit concerned that it might actually happen. It's been one of those crazy years, and the thing is, it's not just globally and in our nation that things have been crazy. For a lot of people, it's also been a terrible year personally. I've known a number of people who had a lot of things that they wanted to do just get canceled. Shows, vacations, moving plans, weddings, funerals, things like that. A lot of stuff has not gone the way that we had hoped, but it even gets even worse than that. People losing their jobs and people not really sure how they're going to provide for their family. And people having other things just broken and torn apart. And I know that when I've gone through crisis before in my life, it's really easy to look at people who are also facing crisis, but doing so very well, and then just kind of sitting back and how are you doing this? How come sometimes, I don't know if you're one of those people that if they mess up your order at the drive-thru, you just cannot handle it. You just you start crying, it's just way too much. Maybe it's not just the fact they messed it up, maybe it's just everything else leading up to that point. But then you look and there's someone whose life was completely ripped up and they're just thriving. And it makes us kind of want to sit back and be like, how do you do that? There's a guy that we're going to look at this morning who had one of those lives where it's he didn't deserve it, but time after time things just got worse for him. And then they would get better, but he just had all these things happen to him. And this is a guy that if we could just sit and ask him, Joseph, how did you do this? How do you make it through without even falling a little bit? And he's one of those guys that is just amazing what he was able to do. And it's also amazing when you consider how his life started out, because he was raised in kind of a normal type of atmosphere, I suppose. Had a mom, had a dad who absolutely loved and adored him. He had brothers, and they sold him into slavery, normal upbringing type stuff. See, Joseph's parents made a mistake. At least I think they made a mistake. I'm pretty sure you'll probably agree. But you know how, if you're a parent, there's going to come a time, if you have more than 2 kids, where they're going to come to you and say, who's your favorite? Right? And what does every single parent say? Not you. No, that's not what they say. If you're asking the question, it's clearly not you. You should know this. Anyway, no, we always say, no, we love both of you equally, right? We love all of you equally. Well, Joseph's parents didn't even pretend like that was true. I mean, their father Jacob clearly favored Joseph, and there's a whole lot of reasons for that, also because his mom, Joseph's mom, was his favorite wife and just was kind of a promise thing and all this. But he really showed how much he loved Joseph in a number of different ways. And if you know the story of Joseph, you've heard of his coat. I mean, this is like probably the greatest just physical gift someone has ever given, because here we are how many thousands of years later, and we know about Joseph's coat. There was a whole play about it, right? Joseph and the Technicolor dream coat. It wasn't Technicolor, but technically it was colorful, so there we go. Maybe that's where they get the name from. I have no idea. But anyway, Joseph is given this huge, amazing, ordained blanket robe thing that is just like, it really annoys his brothers, because it was clearly Jacob saying, Joseph, you're my favorite. And then he puts the younger of all the brothers, there was 10 of them working at that time, and then Joseph. Joseph was the youngest, and he basically made Joseph the supervisor of the other 10. And at one point, Joseph brought back a bad report. Now, we don't know whether this was actually accurate or not. We're pretty sure it is, because it doesn't say that Joseph lied. It's just he brought back a bad report. They weren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. So as you can imagine, the brothers are already kind of annoyed with Joseph. He's the favorite. He's already tattling on us. And then Joseph makes maybe a mistake of his own. It's hard to tell why he did this, but he had a couple of dreams that were, so powerful to him, it just seems like he spat it out to them. He just told them, hey guys, this is amazing. Like, listen to this dream. And he told them the dream, and it's so obvious what it means that his brothers are even more annoyed, because what his dream meant is that all of his brothers were going to bow down to him. Then Joseph has another dream, and he tells his father about it. Hey, Dad, guess what? I have a dream, and you're going to see pretty obvious that you're going to bow down to me eventually. Like, that did not happen then. There was no point when the father was supposed to bow down to the son. And so even Jacob was annoyed with Joseph over that one. And so his brothers, it's kind of like a combustion chamber. Everything was just kind of building up, ready to explode. So one day all the brothers are out in the field, and Jacob tells Joseph, go check in on your brothers. Tell me what they're doing. Well, we already saw how that worked out once before. So they see Joseph coming from a while away, and they recognize his coat. And something clicked in them. It was like all that pent-up anger, frustration. They're like, no one else is around right now. We could just kill him. Let's do that. Let's kill him. And so Joseph gets there, and Reuben talks them off of that ledge. He says, let's not kill him. I got a better idea. Let's throw him in a well. Because apparently that's the merciful thing to do to your annoying brothers, to throw them into a well. And so they take off Joseph's coat, and they throw him into a well, and they start talking about what they're going to do with them. Reuben is kind of off, the oldest brother that saved Joseph's life. And then they see a caravan coming by of Ishmaelites who were traders. And they were like, hey, why don't we sell them to these guys, and at least we can make some money off of our brother. So that's what they did. They pulled him out of the well, and I'm sure Joseph was like, thanks, guys. I learned my lesson. Oh, you're selling me into slavery. That's unfortunate. So he gets taken away by the Ishmaelites. And it's amazing, because through this whole thing, that's just like the beginning chunk of Joseph's life. All this craziness happened, and it wasn't his fault. He didn't deserve this. Yeah, maybe he shouldn't have told his brothers. Maybe, that wasn't the best idea, but it doesn't mean he deserved being sold into slavery. But he still gets sent off, and the Ishmaelites trade him to a guy in Egypt named Potiphar. And God does something amazing in Potiphar. Now, you would think someone who was sold as a slave wouldn't be able to get very far. I don't know a lot about slavery, but my guess is that there's not a lot of levels to be able to go up as a slave. It's not something you get into hoping to one day be in upper management. But that's actually what happened to Joseph. He gets to Potiphar's household, and God blesses him. It says God was with him, and he blessed him. He prospered everything that Joseph did. Potiphar saw this. And so Potiphar actually, if you're there in Genesis 39, put him in charge of everything except for one thing. If you're there in Genesis 39, look at verse 6. It says, so Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except for the food they ate. And I'm fairly certain that this isn't just talking about, like, I think Joseph probably could have even been the one to organize the meals. What he's talking about is the food he was currently putting into his mouth. I mean, he had that much charge over Potiphar's household. The only thing that he didn't have any claim to was the food Potiphar was currently putting into his mouth. I mean, wow. Just completely in charge of all that. You would think, great, that's a fantastic story. Let's make the movie. But that wasn't even close to the end for Joseph's life. Because Potiphar had a wife who was, let's just say, a unique individual. And she saw that Joseph, who was only, he was 17 when he was sold into slavery. So he was at some point after 17 years old. Young, handsome-looking guy. And she sees him, and she says, I want him. And so she keeps calling to him to come and be with him. And he says no over and over again, and which is fantastic. But here's the thing that I find amazing. Joseph didn't deserve to be put in slavery, but he's in slavery. Now he's risen to a pretty high position. Everything is given to him, and yet no power is going to his head. Right? He's not swelling up with pride or anything. And even so much, he recognizes where all of this is coming from. Because if you're there in Genesis 39, skip on down to verse 9, after she keeps pestering him. And this is what it says in verse 9. He's explaining to her why he's not going to do this. He says, no one is greater in the house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except for you, because you're his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Here's the reason I find that so amazing, is that he doesn't say, how can I do this wicked thing against Potiphar? He is so focused and heavenly minded that in this moment of temptation, he says, it's unthinkable to do before God, because there's a reality there for him. He knows everything that's happened is because of what God has done in him and through him. And he says, how could I do such an awful thing before God? And I love that mindset. And you would think that awesome show of faith of him standing up for what's right would then mean that God's going to bless him even more. And he does, but not in the way we typically think of blessing people. Because Potiphar's wife kept egging him on and finally tricks him and has him come in when no one else is in the household, and she tries to get him again, grabs his coat, and Joseph runs away without his cloak. It's the second time in his life that something bad has now been foreshadowed by the removing of Joseph's clothing. And he runs out, and Potiphar's wife is now so frustrated and angry, she's like, that's it. If I can't have him, he can't even have his own life. And so she tells Potiphar that he tried to rape her and gets him thrown in jail. And not just any jail, this is the king's prison. This is where I'm assuming they know how best to pour out their frustrations on people. These are people who the king has specifically chosen to go into prison. And so now you have Joseph, who's been sold into slavery, rises up the ranks, only to have it all taken away for something that wasn't his fault, he didn't deserve. Now he's thrown in jail. And once again, you would think someone in prison does not have a lot of ranks to rise up through, but God blesses Joseph. And once again, it says he was with Joseph, and he rises up the ranks, and he was put in charge of all of the inmates. Everything they did ran through Joseph. It's just amazing that happened. But keep in mind, he's still in jail. It doesn't matter that he's like higher up. He's still being kept away when he doesn't deserve to be there. And so as he's in jail, and I'm assuming just as he's talking with some of these inmates, he comes across two guys who the king personally had thrown in there because they did something. We don't know what it is, but it's the king's cupbearer and the king who's like in charge of food. It's a little cloudy as to specifically what he did, but kind of like the food taster, make sure the food wasn't poisoned. Others say it's like a butler. Regardless, he was very personal with the king, with Pharaoh. And so Pharaoh, he did something to him, and he throws this guy into prison, and same thing with the baker. Maybe he made a dish that the baker or the Pharaoh didn't like. I don't know. But these two guys are in there, and they have a dream, which Joseph already has some, he's had some experience with dreaming. So they tell him about this dream that they had. He overhears them talking about it, and he interprets their dreams for them. And for the cupbearer, Joseph hears the dream. He's like, hey guys, this is what's going to happen to you. 3 days is what your dream means. 3 days, you're going to go up to Pharaoh. He's going to restore you to your position. That's pretty good news. And then the baker overhears this, and he's like, oh, awesome. I can't wait. Hey, Joseph. And he tells Joseph his dream. And if you skip on over to Genesis chapter 40, and if you look at verse 19, this is the interpretation of the baker's dream. It says, within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Well, that's probably not the way he thought that was going to go. But sure enough, 3 days go by, cupbearer gets restored to his position, the baker gets not restored to his position. When Joseph interpreted this dream for the cupbearer, he said, can you just do me a favor? Can you just tell Pharaoh about me? Tell him that I didn't do anything wrong to be in here? And the cupbearer says, absolutely, man. Yeah, this is awesome. I can't wait to get back up there. Well, after the cupbearer is restored, at the end of chapter 40, it says the chief cupbearer, however, didn't remember Joseph. He forgot about him. For 2 years. Joseph already did not belong in that jail. He didn't deserve to be in the jail. And 2 years go by after Joseph probably thought he had some hope to get out. This guy's going to go back to Pharaoh. He'll tell him about it, and I get out. 2 years go by, and nothing. And what's crazy to me is you would think someone in that position, I mean, how many times have we felt like we were abandoned by God? I mean, maybe never, and that's awesome. Or if you go and you read through the Old Testament, there's a number of times where people cried out, and they were like, why have you abandoned us, God? It's heart-wrenching when you feel like God's not hearing you, when you feel like God's not acting in your life the way that you thought he was going to act. There Joseph was for 2 years, being righteous and faithful and nothing. And yet, he doesn't hold a grudge at all. In fact, when those 2 years were up, the reason the cupbearer remembered him is because Pharaoh had a dream. And Pharaoh got all the magicians and the wise men, I almost said wise guys, all the wise guys, they came in there and he started telling them his story, Anyway, but called the wise men in there and he told them about the dream and no one could interpret it for him. And then it clicks in the cupbearer's mind, oh, no. Pharaoh, I know a guy who might be able to help you out. So they bring Joseph up. And here's what's amazing to me, is that Joseph, 2 years after being in that jail, is brought before Pharaoh, and this is his moment. This is his moment to show them that he's the right guy. He's the one who shouldn't be in that jail. You would think that after all that pent-up frustration and anger and angst about being left in a jail that he didn't deserve, that he would come out and be like, what is wrong with you, cupbearer? What is wrong with you, Pharaoh? What is wrong with you, God? That's not what he says at all. Pharaoh brings him before him, and he says, Joseph, can you interpret this dream for me? And look at how he responds there in chapter 41, verse 16. This is his moment, and this is how Joseph responds. I cannot do it. Not exactly the reply I think any of us would have given in that moment. Most of us would have been pretty anxious to get out of that jail. So much so that we would have said, yeah, dude, anything. Let's do this. And instead, Joseph knows where all of his blessings, all of his faithfulness, everything is coming from God. And he says, I can't do this. And look at how he actually answers this in full. He says, I can't do this, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Even in this moment, after most of us would feel abandoned by God, Joseph still has full faith. It's not me. It's God. He's going to be the one to give you the answer that you're seeking out. So Pharaoh tells him the dream, and God interprets it through Joseph. There's going to be 7 years of just amazingness. Everything in Egypt is going to grow. You're going to have just 7 fruitful years beyond anything you've ever had before. But then there's going to be 7 years of a severe famine that's going to be so bad, people aren't even going to remember the previous 7 years. And so Joseph tells them, here's what you need to do. You got to get a guy in a position during those first 7 years, is able to keep a fifth of all the grain, and you store it. You just keep storehouses of all this grain, so that during these 7 years of famine, you would have food for your nation, so you don't, die. And so that's what they did. And what's amazing to me is if you look at what Joseph's reply was, he doesn't even say, hey, I can do this. He just says, hey, Pharaoh, here you go. And I kind of picture, we don't read this obviously, but I kind of picture just Joseph kind of walking away like, you good? Okay, I'll go back to my cell now. And but he doesn't. He just completely leaves it before God. And then Pharaoh says, hey, Joseph, you want a job? And he makes Joseph now number 2 in the entire nation. And a lot of times when we look at the story of Joseph, we kind of leave out what happens afterwards. And we skip to right when his brothers come in and he makes amends to his brothers and his father and all that. But it's actually amazing that Joseph still was faithful to God even after he was now raised up to second in command in all of Egypt from a prisoner. I mean, we've seen people have power go to their heads for a lot less than second in command of a whole nation. And yet he was faithful. And in fact, when 7 years came up and they were fruitful, he helped organize that and get all the grain stacked up. Then when the famine hit, if you go over to Genesis 41:56, what I find funny is that the famine hits and the people do what people do best, right? What happens when a crisis happens in the United States? Who do we blame? The president, right? It doesn't matter who's the president. It's just when something bad happens, gas prices go up, it's the president's fault. The taxes go up, it's the president's fault. Never mind all the other people we've been voting for throughout the years. It's definitely just the president's fault. So same thing happens. Famine hits, and everyone goes straight to the president. They go to Pharaoh, and in verse 55, it says, when all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. And then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, go to Joseph and he'll tell you what to do. Can you imagine if when the coronavirus hit, President Trump came on the TV and he said, God bless America, Mike, you got this, buddy. And then he just left. I mean, that's almost exactly what happens here. They all go to Pharaoh and they're like, what do we do? What do we do? He's like, Joe, your time to shine, buddy. And they all go to Joseph, and guess what Joseph does? He handles it. He takes care of it. He has to go through those 7 years of trying to organize all of this and distribute this food and find out how to sell it because people eventually got so poor they ran out of money. So they had to trade livestock, and they had to figure out how that was going to work. And then they ran out of livestock. They had to trade land and themselves. And he was faithful through all of that. He just trusted God through all of that. And then after or during that time of the famine, his brothers come in and he kind of, it's actually fantastic. If you read through the end of Genesis, you can see how he kind of eggs his brothers along until he finally just forgives them, which he had done all the way. He never held a grudge against his brothers for what they did to him. And we eventually see his brothers and his father, all of them bowing before Joseph. And it's amazing. You look at a life like that. There's so many examples of faith all the way through. Just an amazing trust in God no matter what was happening. I can't imagine trying to summarize a life like that in one sentence. And guess what? The writer of Hebrews does just that. And it's amazing. If you go to Hebrews chapter 11, let's just see. How do you summarize a life of faith in just one sentence like that? And this is what it says. Verse 22. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt, and he gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. And that's it. You know, it was amazing when I first read through Hebrews 11, I was reading that, and I think it just did not click with me which Joseph this was. Because when you go and you look at the story of Joseph, you look at everything that he went through, my guess is if you look at his whole life, you wouldn't have picked this to be the example of faith that we might want instilled in each of us. I mean, I thought it would say something like, by faith, Joseph trusted God even as he was thrown into slavery, and as he was thrown into jail, and as he was accused of things, and even as he led a nation, he just trusted in God the whole way. And it doesn't mention any of that. Instead, we get Joseph. He told them about the Exodus and where to bury him after he was long, long dead. It's actually amazing if you go to the end of Genesis, when his father Jacob died, his brothers thought that Joseph was then going to take his vengeance out on him. And so they write word to him, and they're like, hey, Dad said you can't kill us. I mean, that's kind of like the Mark Thomas paraphrase. But in essence, you're like, you can't touch us, Joseph. And Joseph was like, guys, that was never a part of the plan, all right? And he uses that verse, that phrase that you've probably heard before. You intended this for evil, but God intended it for good, right? We've heard that before. He says that. But then you get right to the end of the book of Genesis, and he gathers his brothers around them, and he's like, guys, I can see my end is coming. And there's going to be a time when God is going to lead us out of this land, and I want you to bury my bones over in the promised land. I'm going to die here, keep me here, but when God delivers you out of Egypt, take me with you. And then that's the end of Genesis. I mean, that's like the end of the story. It's almost as if, like, when you've watched a TV show, and you know when you're getting to the last, 30 seconds, and you're like, they're not going to wrap up this story. Oh, no. There's going to be a part 2, and you know there's a cliffhanger coming. That was kind of what Joseph probably felt at the end of his life. Like, all those promises that God gave my father and my father's father and his father, I'm not going to see them either. But instead of reacting like how so many of us do, he reacts exactly like how he did the rest of his life. He looks forward in hope. And he looks forward in faith. And he knows that God is going to do it. And so the only way that he could think to instill that in his people is giving them instructions for what to do when it actually happens. Guys, it's going to happen. Bring me out of this land. God told us we're going to be a great nation. That's going to happen. God told us he's going to give us this land. It's going to happen. And when it does, bring me with you. It would be easy for us to look at this life and just think to ourselves, is my faith that big that I trust in God no matter what's going on or how hard things are? And I think that's a good question to maybe ask ourselves, but I think the question we are learning from in Hebrews 11 isn't so much whether your faith is that big, but rather, are you instilling hope in other people like how Joseph did? It's not so much a personal reflection as much as it is understanding, are you doing this type of faith? Hope is so embedded in our faith, in who we are. In fact, Paul in Romans 5 tells us about a foundation that hope is built on for us. You know the old hymn, I don't even remember the name of it is, but my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. All right, Kathy already knew what song it was. I'm seeing a lot of blank faces, but anyway. It's an old hymn. You can go read it. But in Romans 5, Paul talks about that idea, about hope being, or the foundation of hope. And at the beginning of Romans 5, this is what he says. Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. That is the foundation of hope. For those of us who have given our lives to Jesus, your hope has a foundation in your faith. Your hope has a foundation in peace with God. Your hope has a foundation in his grace, in his forgiveness of your sins. Hope for us isn't just, man, I can't wait to be in heaven because that's going to be awesome. Like, yeah, absolutely. Heaven is going to be amazing. But we can't even comprehend that. You know what we can comprehend? What we see all around us. And the hopelessness that we see around us. Joseph had so many times in his life where he could have just given up. He said, there's no way I'm getting out of this prison. There's no way I'm getting out of slavery. There's no way that I can handle the stresses of running a nation when Pharaoh's just kind of on the sidelines doing whatever in the world pharaohs do. But he didn't. And with even the last ounce of strength he had, as he realized he wasn't going to see the promises of God fulfilled, he remembered them. It actually says in Hebrews 11, that word in the NIV, that when it says he spoke of the exodus of the Israelites, of them being delivered out of Egypt, Your translation and older ones say mentioned. He mentioned it. I actually really like the Darby Bible, which says he called to mind. Because what the word literally means is he remembered. And I think the reason why it doesn't get translated that way is how does that make sense? He remembered the Exodus that wasn't going to happen for another couple hundred years. But the thing is, with Joseph, the promises of God were just as much of a reality as everything else in his life, as if he had already experienced it. And so his act of faith that we can learn from isn't so much he trusted God through all these awful situations. It's that he trusted God through the one promise, the couple promises he knew he wouldn't see fulfilled himself. And he passed on hope. Are we doing that for our world, for people around us? See, hope is this incredibly powerful thing. If you pick it up in Romans 5, where we left off, right in the middle of verse 2, he goes more into what we build on this foundation of hope, and he says, and we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, which is a whole sermon in and of itself, but it's the place, no matter what you're going through, just like Joseph's life, he gloried in his sufferings. It's not like he liked it, but in the midst of suffering, he glorified God. He says, we glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope doesn't put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Let me ask you, do you feel like that is real? Because the hope that we have, he says, we know that we have because God poured his love into us. See, we can talk about the hope that we have all day long. We can even post about it on social media. But the question maybe we should be asking ourselves is, what am I doing to instill hope in those around us? Because if you really have hope, if this is real to you, you don't just keep it to yourself. It would be painful not to tell people about the hope that you have in Jesus Christ. It's kind of like Jeremiah talking about the prophecies God was giving him. And he's like, it's like a fire inside of me. If this hope is real in our lives, that's the way it feels. That's the way we have this burning desire to be hope bringers to our world. When Joseph, after he told his brothers about all the dreaming and whatnot, he's walking out to his brothers before they try to kill him. When they point out to him, they're like, oh, there's that dreamer again. What if they said that about us? You know, Sandy comes rounding the corner and they're like, oh, there's that dreamer again. Here comes Jeff, the guy who has dreams. See, we can kind of make fun of dreamers, but the truth is people who are dreamers bring hope into hopeless situations, even if it seems ridiculous to the rest of us. And we have that calling on our lives. If you look where Paul goes in Romans 5, he gives us such an incredible picture of the hope that we have. He says, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. In other words, when no one else saw it, when the goodness of God was not even a trace inside of me, when I wasn't doing anything according to what he commands and wills for me, even while I was completely, eternally separated from him, Jesus went to the cross and he died for our sins. That is the hope that we have. How are you instilling that hope in others? Maybe we can reflect. Maybe we can reflect on what we know is true. We know that because of Jesus, when I take my last breath here, my next breath is going to be standing before the throne of God. Because of Jesus, I know that one day And maybe we'll be here to witness this, or maybe we won't. We're going to see the Son of Man coming on the clouds. And he's going to call us to him. And the weight and weariness of life will melt before his presence. We have this hope. I don't want you to think of instilling hope on such a global level that it takes you completely out of the picture, because it's really easy to do that, to hear something like this and be like, yeah, come on, church, let's do the hope thing. Let's bring hope to everyone. I want you to think not in terms of, let's bring hope to the world. I want you to think in terms of, let's bring hope to my world, to the people you know, the people you love, the people you interact with, even if you don't really feel like loving them, the people that are a part of your life, your kids, your grandkids, your parents, your grandparents, your cousins, your coworkers, your friends, the churchgoers, people that you meet on the street. I want you to think constantly, how am I being a hope bringer to this world? We're going to sing a few songs as we finish up this morning. And every week we take just a moment and we reflect on what brought us hope in the first place. That it wasn't something we were able to concoct or pull together last minute. It wasn't something that we worked so hard for we managed to obtain it. It was that Jesus, while we were still sinners, died for us. That he went to the cross and he let his body be broken. He let his blood pour out. That he let us be able to join him somehow in that process so that we might have forgiveness of our sins. And when we stand before God, we're not going to be weighed down by that sin because Jesus took it. And every week we remember that with the communion trays. You have 4 spots up here, back there, and then in the very back there's the offering trays. But as we sing these last 3 songs, take a moment and thank God if you've accepted him for what he has done. And these are the little disposable ones. So there's like a top layer with a wafer and then the second layer where the juice is. Anyway, I think you'll be able to figure it out. But if you've not given your life to Jesus and this hope just sounds either crazy or unreal, talk to me. Ask questions about it. Because this hope is not meant to just be for us. And my prayer is that you have other people in your life who see you and who are bringing this hope to you. Not just right now. How are you instilling hope in others? If you're able, please stand and let's praise God.